Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Aakash Sahney, and I'm a product manager on the Gmail team at Google. I'm super excited today to tell you more about AMP for Email, what it is, what you can do with it, and how you can get started. So I wanted to start this session off by talking a little bit about email itself. We all use email for a wide variety of our communication needs almost every single day. We use email for things like making plans with our friends and colleagues, for checking out promotions from places that we shop, for getting the latest updates from social networks that we use, for providing feedback on products or services that we might have purchased. So many, many different use cases that people use email for all the time. In fact, email is so popular that 1.5 billion people use Gmail every month. And last year, over 280 billion emails were sent every single day. So it's hard to overstate how critical email is to people. It keeps them connected. It keeps us connected to a bunch of the things that are important in our lives. But email has also been around for a long time, a few decades at least. And over that time period, the web has evolved really significantly. We've gone from static articles and content on the web to dynamic, interactive apps that support complex interactions. For example, in the early 2000s, no one thought that you'd be able to run a full spreadsheet application in your browser, but that's exactly what we can do today with Google Sheets. Over that same time period, though, email has stayed roughly the same. Yes, there have been lots of innovations to how we manage and process our email, but the actual contents of email messages have largely stayed exactly the same over this time period. Emails can include text, images, and links, nothing much more. The content is still static. It still gets out of date, so users might be looking at inaccurate information and stale content. It's not clickable and interactive like users have now come to expect from the rest of the modern web. So to recap, email's been around for decades. It plays a central role in our lives, and during that time, the rest of the web has evolved really dramatically. And yet email has kind of been left behind. The messages you can send still just contain text, links, and images. It hasn't really kept up with our expectations from experiences around the web. So that's why last year we introduced AMP for Email. AMP for Email allows email senders to include all of the richness and interactivity of AMP right there inside of their email messages, bringing email into the 21st century. AMP for Email can make your emails more interactive with components like AMP Carousel, AMP Accordion, and AMP State that let you build clickable interfaces inside your messages. Using AMP List and AMP Bind, you can keep your email messages up to date so that users are always seeing fresh content, fresh information, and accurate information when they open the message. And with components like AMP Form, users can actually take action right there inside of the message. Like they can respond to a questionnaire or an invitation, all from the email message and without opening up a new tab in their browser. And with all of these features, from the carousel accordion stuff to the AMP List and the AMP Form, email senders can actually build rich miniature applications inside of their email messages. So a ton of new use cases and impact is possible with AMP for Email. And the last point is that AMP for Email is compatible with your existing email programs. It adds to the overall email standard rather than replacing it. So a bunch of never-before-possible use cases are opened up with AMP for Email. And as you might have heard, a few weeks ago, we announced that AMP for Email is now available in Gmail. So email senders can include this dynamic, up-to-date content powered by AMP in their messages today. When we launched a couple weeks ago, we announced a number of really exciting emails from senders who had early access to AMP for Email. They have already started including AMP inside of their campaigns. They've built some really awesome features for users using AMP for Email and have seen some really impressive results. So we'll run through a few examples here. We'll start with commenting in Google Docs. As one example. Instead of receiving comment notifications that go stale and that require you to open up a new tab, now with the new AMP emails from Google Docs, when someone mentions you in a comment, you'll see an up-to-date thread in Gmail where you can easily reply or resolve the comment right from the message like you see in this screenshot. Pinterest has made it easier to discover new ideas and save them to boards in your Pinterest account. So when Pinterest sends you a notification recommending new ideas to you, you can quickly browse them and save them to whichever boards you like, all without opening up a new tab in your browser. Ecwid makes it really easy to browse catalogs and shop for items using AMP Carousel and AMP State, so you can hear about the latest sales from your favorite retailers. Indeed is a job search website that has a new AMP-powered job alert email. So these emails notify users about jobs that they might be interested in. And their new AMP-powered email fetches the latest recommended jobs and inserts them into the message so that the user sees jobs that are more relevant, jobs that are still available, and jobs that are more personalized. Now, with these emails, Indeed has observed 2 times the clicks on their job alert emails compared to the static equivalents. So a pretty massive improvement in the key metric that they measure for interactions with their emails. Oyo is a popular hospitality and travel booking company that sends users travel recommendations where they can browse suggested accommodations and view details. So in this example, you can see the user browsing through proposed accommodations. They can see details like user ratings, whether there's Wi-Fi, and whether breakfast is included, and they can make their decision about whether to book this stay. Not only are these messages super cool and more useful for users, in a pilot that Oyo recently ran, they're also seeing massive improvements to click-through rate and conversion on these emails. They're seeing 57% higher click-through rate and 60% higher conversion, which is sort of showcases the massive potential when you add this interactivity and up-to-date content to your email messages. And we'll hear a bunch more from Anirudh from Oyo in a little bit. So that's just a handful of the senders who are adopting AMP for email already. Many more are coming soon, including Redbus, Freshworks, and Booking.com. It's very early, but we're excited about the impact that AMP emails are having on use cases that users experience every day, and also bringing real, measurable value to email senders who adopt it. So we knew that when we created AMP for email, that for it to actually meaningfully modernize email in the way that we wanted, in the way that we envisioned, we also had to engage the email ecosystem to ensure that AMP emails could be delivered and tested using the right tools. And there are a lot of pieces to this puzzle for email senders. Many senders use email delivery services to ensure that their messages reach users reliably. They use a service for testing their emails to ensure that they render properly across devices and clients. And to have the most impact possible, AMP emails had to be compatible with as many email clients as possible. So we're really excited to share that we've partnered with some of the most popular players in each of these areas. We've partnered with the email delivery services, SendGrid, SparkPost, and even Amazon AWS's Simple Email Service and Pinpoint Service all support AMP for email. Litmus is a very popular testing platform for testing your emails, which also now supports AMP for email. And last, we've engaged with other email providers. AMP for email is supported today in Gmail and in Mail.ru, both popular email services, and is coming soon to Yahoo Mail and Outlook.com. So with AMP for email, you can bring engaging experiences to your emails, shifting them from being static, flat messages to dynamic, interactive, mini applications. Your emails can fetch up-to-date information and allow users to take action right from the message. And with all of that, you can build, AMP for email unlocks a whole range of new use cases that we never thought were possible inside of emails. So a lot of impact and a lot of power. And we're also seeing, like I mentioned earlier, some really impressive results from the sender's perspective. So not only are we making these experiences more useful for users, they're also having a massive impact on the effectiveness of email campaigns. AMP for email is also compatible with your existing email program and a bunch of different delivery tools like SendGrid and SparkPost, as well as Litmus, and available in 2 email providers, Gmail and Mail.ru, coming soon to Yahoo and Outlook.com. So we're really excited about AMP for email, and we can't wait to see what you all build using AMP for email. And it's easier than ever to get started. You can learn how to build your AMP emails, test your AMP emails, and register to send your AMP emails to Gmail users at the link that's on the screen, g.co/dev/AMP email. And we'll put that back up on the screen at the end of the presentation. And now for the rest of the session, we're going to focus on sharing a bit about how you can get started. So we'll start with a session from Filip from our team, who will show us how we can get started with some simple examples on AMP for email. And then we have a few other partners who will be coming up to share some more complex tips and tricks for scaling and productionizing your AMP emails. So to start with, I'd like to invite Filip Stanis up on stage to walk us through some simple examples of AMP for email.
Hello, everyone. My name is Filip Stanis, and I'm a partner developer advocate working on AMP for email at Google. Now, you heard from Moti yesterday, and you've heard from Aakash just now. AMP for email is here. And I bet many of you are wondering, how do I get started with it? How can I send an email that contains AMP? Good news, that's why I'm here. So, like every good AMP development, we're going to start with going to amp.dev, specifically playground.amp.dev. This is the familiar AMP playground, and the first thing that we are going to do here is change the format to AMP for email in the top left corner. What this will give us is the simple email boilerplate that we'll start from. And we're also going to expand this window so we have more space to maneuver. Now let's break down this boilerplate a little bit. This is the minimum amount of markup that you need for a valid AMP email. First things first, you have the HTML tag with the AMP for email attribute. This is similar to the lightning bolt you use in AMP for web, except in this case you're just mentioning that this markup is an AMP email. Next up, we have the meta character set. This just tells it that you'll be using the UTF-8 character set. And this is mandatory, just like AMP for the web. Next up, we have the title tag. This one is optional. It's there for compatibility reasons. So you're free to keep it, but emails have a subject, so we don't really need it. We'll just remove it. Coming up next is the AMP runtime, the famous v0.js. You'll notice this is the exact same one that you use for the web. And this is the same AMP runtime that powers emails as well. Up next, we have the AMP for email boilerplate. Again, you'll notice it's similar, but much simpler than the one we have for the web. Really, the only thing we need to do here is make sure the body is not shown until v0.js kicks in. Finally, we have the style tag. This is where you can put all your custom CSS. Here we're just putting some margin on the h1 tag. And of course, the most important part of the email is the body. Now, one good thing about using the AMP playground is that it's real time. So we can just immediately make this email a little bit friendlier to AmpConf and say hello to everyone. Now, this is a talk about email. So what I'm going to do next is open my Gmail account. And what I prepared here is an email that uses HTML that just has some simple markup that we'll use to get started. You'll see a couple of images, some text, nothing special there. And we'll use this as a starting point for our AMP email. We'll upgrade this email to be a bit more dynamic. The way we're going to do that is go back to the AMP playground, and I'm just going to copy-paste the markup that I used to create this HTML email. And this looks quite similar to what we had in Gmail. Now, some of you might have noticed there's a problem here. We have a few of these red circles, and there are some errors here. This is not valid AMP. And the culprit is, of course, the images. We're using HTML images, so what we need to do is change them to AMP images. It's a simple fix. We already have a width and height, so all we need to do is replace these images with AMP image, and let's not forget to close the tag. Another thing I want to bring your attention to here is that all URLs are absolute. We cannot use relative URLs in emails. This is simply because relative URLs don't really make much sense since you'll be in your email client and not on a website. So just keep that in mind when you're making emails. All URLs will need to be absolute. Now, once we've done that, we're back to having this email that we started from, but now it's valid AMP, which is really good. Another small tweak we can do is move this CSS from the style tag, from the style attribute to the style tag up top. This is not really necessary, but it will make the whole thing a little bit more manageable. So we'll give this div a class, and we'll just move the CSS attributes we have up top. There we go. And we might as well give it some padding while we're at it, because why not? And yeah, this is now a valid AMP email. Unfortunately, it's not very exciting. It's still just HTML with some valid AMP markup and some CSS. So we're going to fix that. One easy thing we can do is add an AMP accordion. The good thing about AMP accordion is that we're already following the correct markup here. We have sections and headings. So all we really need to do is wrap this whole email inside an AMP accordion, and this should just work. And I'm going to do that right now. Of course, never forget, we're using a new AMP component here. We need to make sure it's included at the top. Luckily, the AMP playground did this for us, so nothing else we need to do here. This seems to work. Let's try it out. We can try out the live preview on the right, see if this accordion collapses and does its thing. Yep, this seems quite good. We have a working accordion. Now, many of you have used AMP, so I'm pretty sure this is not very exciting. We should probably take this to Gmail instead. Now, to do that, we're going to use a different tool. We're going to use the Gmail AMP playground. To use it, we can just navigate to amp.gmail.dev/playground. This is the tool made by the Gmail team that's similar to the AMP playground. And you'll see that it's quite similar in appearance, and there is a preview and a markup. But one thing that's different about it is the send button. The send button allows us to immediately send this email that we've drafted to our Gmail account. It will use the account of the currently logged in Gmail user to do that. So it basically always sends the email to us. And let's try that out right now. Let's go back to the AMP playground. We're going to copy our markup, go back to the Gmail playground, and paste it there. And if we've done this correctly, the accordion should still work. Seems good? Let's give it a better subject line. Maybe photo album in AMP. And I think we're done. Ready to press that send button. OK. Now, if this worked, I can just go back to my Gmail account. And there's a new email right there. Ooh, that's not good. It's not an AMP accordion. Now, Gmail has this requirement. If you'd like to use AMP inside of Gmail, you need to be registered with Gmail as an AMP sender. You can learn more about the registration process from the Gmail docs, or you can just approach us in the AMP for Email booth after this talk, and we can tell you more about this. But right now, we just want to try it out. We don't really want to send this accordion to 1 billion users. So there is a quick thing we can do. We can enable developer settings for AMP, for dynamic emails. And this will allow us to render this AMP email inside of Gmail right now. So let's do that. Let's head over to Gmail settings. Now, the one we are looking for is called dynamic email. And the first thing that you need to make sure is you need to check that dynamic emails are enabled. And you can do that by checking this checkbox. And after you've done that, there's the dynamic email development button right below it. Press that, and you will see this pop-up box. Now, this is the important part. This pop-up box allows you to type in a single email address that will be an allowed sender for AMP emails. This means that any email sent from this address will arrive into this one inbox, even if it's not registered with Gmail, which is very nice for testing. And in fact, we can just put the email address of the playground right there. What's the email address of the playground again? You should probably check the documentation. You don't really need to know this by heart, but it's amp@gmail.dev. This is the email address that the playground used to send us the email that we already received that's currently not displaying. We're going to press OK and save our settings. And this will also refresh Gmail automatically for us. And if we've done everything correctly, we can open this email again. There we have it, our first dynamic email. It's an AMP accordion rendering right in the email inbox, right before our eyes. Now, this is dynamic, and it's definitely something you don't see in email every day, but it's not very exciting. We can probably do something better here. We can make this email a bit more dynamic. And to do that, let's first delete what we have. We're going to start over. We'll try using a more interesting AMP component. I'm thinking the component that would be great here is AMP list. This will allow us to fetch content from the server and render it inside of Gmail. So as a source, I'll use this JSON endpoint we have on amp.dev, which has some images and some descriptions. I'll give it an ID. And we also need to give it some height. Let's say 500. Now, what this will do, as you're probably familiar with AMP list, is fetch this JSON endpoint, and it will allow us to render it inside an AMP mustache template, of course. And the template we're going to use here is pretty much the same one that we already had. So we'll put a section there, a title to it. We can wrap the rest of it in a div, put an AMP image, set the source. We're going to need width and height, of course. And as you can see, this is all being updated live on the right side. So we have some nice images here, and we just need to add the description as well. OK, this looks good. This looks like the original email we had, except this one is rendered using AMP list, so it's all dynamic. Let's do another thing. Let's put a button up top. This button will call refresh on AMP list. Now, this endpoint is a bit specific. It will return random images with some random text every time. So if we refresh AMP list, we will get different results. And that's quite nifty, because we can then just get different results every time we press this button. I think this looks good. We have our original email, but now dynamic. So I guess all we need to do now is bring this to Gmail. And you know the drill. Copy this, go to the Gmail playground, and paste it. And hopefully it still looks good. Everything still works. So I think we're ready to give it a subject and tap send. We'll use a different subject so we can differentiate it from the previous email we sent. And we press send. And if this works correctly, we'll see this email in our Gmail inbox. So let's go back to Gmail. There's a new email right there. And would you look at that? All dynamic. This email is rendered fully from our server endpoint. And all of these images are loaded after the email is opened. So it's completely dynamic, and it comes from our server, powered by AMP list, using AMP inside Gmail. But there's one more thing. We can press the load more button, and you'll notice that this will refresh the list. So this email can be kept evergreen, depending on our server content. We can update this email content by simply updating our server, and there's no need to send another email with this same content, thanks to our good friend, AMP list. Now, I hope you enjoyed this email. It's quite dynamic, but it's also quite basic. It's still just images and text. So what I'm going to do now is invite on stage Michael from Doodle and Anirudh from All Your Rooms. They have created some more advanced emails, and they have some really nifty tips and tricks they can share with us about the emails they've built. And by the way, these emails are already in production, and they are sending these emails to their users. So they have some real experience with this and some really useful things to say. And with that in mind, I'd like to invite Michael from Doodle on stage.
Thanks, Filip. Hello, Tokyo. My name is Michael Wuergler, and I am an engineer at Doodle. Doodle's a company that is focused on solving the problems around scheduling. So Doodle can help you book and schedule your meetings faster and easier. You might already be familiar with the polling functionality of Doodle, where you simply supply a set of options, invite some people to participate, everyone votes on a time that works best for them, and from there, a clear winner emerges. But now with Doodle, you can find the best time to meet a person simply by using the new one-to-one meeting invites. Simply offer the times that work best for you, and either send a link directly to your guest, or you can send them an email invite. You can even send this event to multiple people and let them choose their favorite option on a first-come, first-served basis without fear of ever being double booked. So no matter how you participate, the meeting can be instantly booked on your calendars. Boom. Doodle 101 just saved you some time. So this is where the story where AMP for email begins. We wanted to make scheduling one-on-ones even faster. So we created a dynamic email that lets the user pick a time directly in their inbox. When the invitees open their inbox, they are greeted with a powerful dynamic experience that is always up to date. This means the time options that your recipient sees are always valid. So they're incapable of double booking your calendar and incapable of showing you time options that have since expired. So for a scheduling company, this is huge because it means that the emails that we send can be smart about scheduling. It means they can adapt to the context of time. It means they can adapt to the context of your booking. And so for us, this is huge, but it's really the users that benefit because dynamic emails align with our core mission, which is to make scheduling faster and easier. Dynamic mails can also do unprecedented things like let you decide which time zone you want to see the time options displayed in. And again, for a scheduling company, this is amazing. Because these emails are dynamic, if you've already booked the event, then you will only ever see the confirmation email instead of the time options, because these emails are smart. They know the context of things. So what did we learn when we created this dynamic email? Let's take a closer look at how we built the dynamic features and how we're able to navigate around a few obstacles when dealing with some of our advanced use cases. First stop was AMP list. It is your best friend on the dynamic side of AMP, but your relationship will be a little different than what you know from AMP development because AMP list and AMP for email has a few key differences. First important difference is that AMP list component does not let you bind to source in an email. Similarly, the form component cannot bind to the action. The ability to set the source attribute is a very powerful AMP feature. But since it's not available in AMP for email, it is safe to say that this is where some of the complexity in your emails might be introduced, is kind of navigating around this limitation. Here on the left, you see an example of a single AMP list and template that does allow dynamic binding to the source attribute. So this is where new data can be fetched and fed to the template as often as you want. But things can be slightly more complicated when you can't bind to source, so you might find yourself in a situation where you have to manage a lot of side effects to pull off some advanced state changes. Luckily, AMP kind of handles all this complexity for you, so in the end, it's actually quite simple. And don't worry if you can't read this code. This is really just to illustrate the fact that we were able to pull off quite some advanced use cases with very little boilerplate. So in my mind, this is a testament to the power and simplicity of AMP. You can do a lot with very little. So let's walk the structure a little. First, we have 3 hoisted templates. These can get somewhat complex because they are sometimes shared, which means they need to account for the different states in your app. But hoisting them means that you can reuse and share them, which is really cool. So in our case, we were sometimes sharing our templates between our AMP list and our form components. Next, we have 3 hidden forms. These can be dynamically submitted, and their inputs can have their values bound to state. And by the way, using forms that you can programmatically submit are not only a workaround for this limitation, but they're a very strong pattern all on its own. You just programmatically submit a form whose hidden inputs can bind their value attributes, and then the form can consume a shared template. It's a very strong pattern. Finally, we have 3 amp list components. These just so happen to share the same endpoint for data, but they were in different parts of our app. And here you see some chained actions. You can do a lot of really powerful and advanced stuff very simply by chaining actions together in AMP. The main takeaway from this section is that some marginal complexity can be expected because you basically have to roll your own internal routing mechanisms. And the chain side effects are probably the trickiest part to manage, in my opinion. But again, AMP takes away all this complexity from you and keeps things pretty simple. So AMP makes complicated things simple. You can quote me on that. And in case I scared you away, let me just emphasize that you can still do a lot with a single AMP list component. Our very first working demo of the Doodle 101 email loaded everything into a single AMP list component. It wasn't until we introduced time zones into the mix and we needed to account for variable height or variable length user-supplied content that things started to get a little tricky. Next focus for us was responsiveness, and initially our misconception with AMP lists layout equals responsive attribute. The label responsive was a little misleading for us at first because what it really means is that it will force the relevant container to honor the aspect ratio of the required width and height attributes. This is great for AMP image and AMP video components, and it's also fine if you know the height of the incoming content, but it's less than ideal when you're trying to build a responsive layout that can handle variable length user-supplied content. And this was exactly our problem. The Doodle 101 email allows the creator to supply custom messages, and these messages can be very long or very short, depending. So we had a tricky time trying to fit these variable length messages into a container that needed to have a fixed height or aspect ratio. First way you could get around this is to set a really high height attribute that can fit all of your content. This is an okay workaround if the AMP list component is the last component in your stack, like you see on the left. Otherwise, the AMP list is capable of clipping the content of the elements below it, like you see on the right. But again, this is still very manageable if you're very careful about the heights that you set. And this is just to show why the clipping can occur. The component will take up the entire height you set, leaving you with this kind of clipping space below the component if the content you supply is not big enough to fill the fixed space. So if the AMP list component can be the last component, or you know the height of the incoming content, then you can totally get away with this option. Second option, we could use scroll bars, but no. Emails have always known how to scale to its content size, and we wanted to respect the email as a medium, but we also don't want to do unforgivable things like put scroll bars within scroll bars, so no. Our current solution was to swap the AMP list for a form when needed. The AMP list and the HTML form can share the same template, so they are effectively copies of each other. The only difference is that the AMP list might have the responsive quirks with a fixed height, and the HTML form is naturally responsive. So swapping one for the other is a pattern that we use a lot only when needed. The main problem with this approach is that it only works if you make a network request. So you remember this slide, you can see how you can programmatically submit the form, and then you can assign it a shared template. So this might be seen as a drawback for some because it requires that extra network request. But it does work, and it is currently solving some problems for us kind of on the more extreme edge of things. That's a nice pattern. Currently, given all these constraints, we have concluded that the best of all worlds scenario is just to mix and match these solution sets. So what we'll do next is we will try to fit more into the initial AMP list that fetches the up-to-date data, then swaps itself out for a copy form as early as needed. In our local tests, we found that the clipping space underneath the AMP list is totally manageable. Another area where we spent some time was learning the difference between AMP's mustache templates versus the original mustache templates. So let's take a look at the mustache documentation to see what we should expect. If you notice the top paragraph, it says, if the person key does not exist, or exists and has a value of null, undefined, false, 0, or NaN, or is an empty list or an empty string, the block will not be rendered. So given a key value with person false, and a template where we would print never shown if the person was set to true, the output we would expect to see in this case is the text shown, because this part of the template would only display if the person value equals true or is truthy. So an AMP on this case will actually render the never shown text, because AMP mustache doesn't read the value of the key to infer truthiness like you would expect. Instead, it sees the existence of the key as truthy. So the bigger implication for us here meant that the server needed to do a lot of conditional checks and only attach the variables to the response JSON payload if the value would have been truthy. So for us, the general rule of thumb was a key that does not exist will always be considered false in AMP mustache, and it's worked well for us so far. Next topic is an important one. Let's take a moment to consider that websites are evergreen, but emails are forever. Web apps have the benefit of continuous delivery, so new features and bug fixes can be made instantly available to your users. But emails are different. Once you send an email, you are forever committed to this email as a fixed version because it's an email, and you can't change the front end of an email that you've already sent. So let me just be clear. AMP for email lets the content of your email be up to date. Every time you open the email, fresh, new content to your users. What is fixed, though, is the actual markup, the source code that you had to type that ships with the email. That's fixed forever. You can't change that. So the strong recommendation here is versioning. Just start versioning your front-end templates and your APIs from the very beginning. This will protect you. Guarantee that you'll be always backwards compatible because your emails will be expected to work no matter how old they are. So versioning can help us not hurt the user's inbox experience. Next big consideration for us was tracking. I won't go into too much detail here, just suffice it to say that you can still use tracking pixels and click tracking on URLs the exact same way you would in an HTML email. I know my slide says same as HTML, but I meant to say same as HTML email. And all your other meaningful tracking can be done through the server. You're basically just taking advantage of the fact that your front end is in constant communication with your back end. And so there, from the back end, you just dispatch your analytics. So those are really the biggest considerations for us when creating an AMP-powered email. Other than that, it was all just typical AMP development. I may have made things sound like they were complicated, but AMP really takes care of all these complications for you. So everything was really very straightforward for us. Just a few bonus items in closing. Use the AMP Playground, which has AMP for email support. You just saw Filip demo it. It has built-in validation. It can instantly send you an email for live testing in your inbox, and it can really help you to prototype and test and troubleshoot your emails. Next, don't skip the tests. And I just want to be the very first to officially welcome you to this new age where you get to start writing integration tests for your emails. If you have hash development equals 1 in your URL bar, then you get access to the print state method, which is on the AMP global. This will print your current application state and help you to debug your applications. This is not AMP for email specific. This is something that you can also do in AMP, but it's really nice when you're building your emails. Finally, another big tip, the ordering of your MIME types matter. The RFC spec will tell you that the order should be plain text, then HTML, then AMP. But due to a limitation in some email clients, we have to be a little bit naughty and break spec in order to get this email working everywhere. But by magic, it does work everywhere that we've tested. This means that the MIME type order that you should use today is plain text, then AMP, then HTML. And I also wanted to mention that some of the email service providers out there that are already AMP enabled are aware of this, and they do this for you behind the scenes. So those are really the biggest takeaways for us in creating our dynamic email at Doodle. We're very excited to be a part of this process, and we're very excited to see the positive user engagement that has come from the inbox. So we're also very excited to see what the rest of you do with this really cool technology. So thank you very much for your time. I will now bring on Anirudh.
Thank you so much, Michael. Hello, everyone. I am Anirudh, and I work as a software developer at OYO Rooms. We are a tech-based hospitality company where we enable our users to be able to book an awesome stay with as less number of taps on the screen as possible. You can mostly find me working on exciting web projects, such as AMP for email, AMP in general, progressive web apps, and so on. So this winters, we had a lot of fun experimenting with AMP emails, and proud to announce that we have finally welcomed them into our production systems. But before I begin describing about all that, let me put forward some points regarding what issues we face with normal emails. So number one, emails with dynamic data, such as ratings or room prices. Once you send those emails, there is no way updating those dynamic pieces of information. So suppose a visitor comes to OYO Rooms website, browses some hotels, makes a search, and leaves without creating a booking yet. In those cases, we might want to send them an email stating that, hey, here are some recommended OYO rooms that you might have left behind. The problem here is that many of those rooms might even get sold out by the time they open their emails. As a result, emails frequently get obsolete. Also, the layouting options in emails are pretty limited these days. They are limited when compared to your normal web pages, and they are limited when compared to the out-of-the-box layouting options that AMP can provide. So all in all, we can say that emails with dynamic data are like a mayfly. They live for a day or maybe even a few hours. But thankfully, today, everything changes. AMP steps in as that long overdue revolution in emails that we as content creators, as email campaigners, did not even know that we needed. And this elegantly solves most of the issues that we just mentioned. Because email is not just email anymore. So here is one of the example AMP HTML email that we created back at OYO. So what this does is it lists out some of the recommended OYO rooms for a user. And you'll notice that when you open this email, an API call actually goes and fetches the fresh data from our servers, so it cannot get stale. Also, the interactivity in this email is off the charts when compared to a normal HTML email. We have a beautiful AMP carousel. When you click on one of the items in the carousel, you have the ability to go to the next screen, view the hotel details, and you are not basically thrown to a new tab like usual emails. Also, when you click on the ratings in the hotel details, it pops up and shows the expanded view of the ratings, which are also freshly fetched from the API. So let's see a minimal version of this code, this AMP HTML markup, to see what goes into creating one of these beautiful email experiences. So suppose you want to include an API call into your emails. You just pick an AMP list and give it a URL for fetching the data, and then throw the data into an AMP template. And then you can use any number of interactive AMP components to create amazing email experiences. It's as easy as that, and your AMP skills really do come in handy. So moving on to one of the more specific examples, the one where you click on the ratings and it pops up and fetches the data from an API. And this is happening inside of the details which just came in from an API itself. So how do we do that? Again, there's a parent AMP list which fetches the hotel details. And you have all the details in the template, along with which there is an aggregate rating, which is also a button by which you on the click of which you can expand the rating details. And you'll notice that the button is actually wrapped in an AMP form. And the form has that endpoint which can fetch the details, the rating details from an API. So on the click of this button, two things are happening. For one, the form is getting submitted, and you can also see that there is an update in the state so that a pop-up can be opened. And then once your data is here, once your rating details are here, you can use your imagination to show in whichever way you want them. So this is pretty awesome, right? But you should be asking questions like, how secure is that? How robust is that? So I'd like to say that API calls can go only to the sender's domain. So if you trust the sender, you thereby trust the API calls. We also have no chance for adding any external scripts into the AMP emails. So only AMP components are allowed. And we have graceful fallback to plain HTML in case your email clients do not support AMP HTML yet, so that the recipients never come across any broken experiences. And here's the great part. We actually did a pilot program and sent AMP emails to actual users, and the results were profounding. 57% better click-through rate was experienced, and what's even better is the 60.20% conversion lift for visitors coming via AMP emails. So let me summarize all of that. You can have the power of AMP emails via interactive components, the various layout options that AMP can provide. Responsiveness is baked in, so that's a big plus. The power of making API calls, form submissions, which can help us in modifying the booking of users, maybe making a search or gathering user feedback right within the email itself. Graceful fallback, like I just mentioned, and the endless potential to create unique solutions right within your recipients' inboxes. So by this time, many of you know that integrating AMP emails requires you to play with a new MIME type, right? But let me emphasize on what actually goes into integrating AMP emails into your existing email systems. What steps do you actually need to take? So suppose that you have your new shining AMP HTML template ready. You need to bring it into your email systems, and you need to set its content type as XAMP HTML. And secondly, and finally, you just need to attach that part into your existing email message or the MIME tree. Now, I know these two steps seem very brief right now. So if you want to go deeper and get your hands dirty with integrating AMP emails and this new MIME type, we have a script ready. This is a Python script. This URL will take you to it. And you can use it and refer it for sending AMP emails via Amazon Simple Email Service, or SES. So thank you so much for listening to me, guys, and keep amplifying.
Nice job. Thanks very much, Anirudh. Can we get another round of applause for all of our demos? Those were really strong. Thank you. So we saw a little about how we can get started with AMP for email, and we invite all of you to start trying AMP for email today. You can use the playground in the AMP playground. You can use the Gmail playground, and all of the documentation is available on the links on the screen. g.co/dev/AMP email details how you can get started testing, as well as details how you can register with Gmail to actually send your emails at scale when you're ready to do that. go.amp.dev/email has all of the more detailed reference on the components you can use, the MIME type ordering, and all of the other details associated. So I invite everyone to visit the documentation on the screen and get started with AMP for email and start building new interactive, dynamic experiences inside of their emails. I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for listening.